Good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us at this 2021 Gordon College Homecoming Special event. My name is Britt Carlson-Eaton. I serve as the Interim Vice President for Advancement here at Gordon College. I'm also a Gordon grad, graduated in 2003, and it's been my joy and privilege to get to work here after graduating. So tonight, or this afternoon, we're in for a lovely treat. We get a chance to hear from our new president, Mike Hammond, who will be interviewed by Sharon Ketcham, who is also a Gordon alum and a faculty member here at Gordon. So without any further ado, Mike and Sharon, please come on up.
Well, welcome to you all. We're just delighted to have this time with you, and I want to start with this line. On July 1st, Dr. Mike Hammond became the 9th president of Gordon College, which already deserves a round of applause, does it not?
Thank you. You just get points for showing up. I get it. That's very good. I'll take it. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Just a brief introduction of him, if you haven't had an opportunity to read or to hear about him. Dr. Hammond is a scholar. His major research field is in American Christianity, focusing specifically on the evangelical movement, civil rights movement, and politics within the 20th century. Dr. Hammond is a proven leader. Hear that phrase, a proven leader in Christian higher education. Okay, I know, he looks young. But he actually has 25 years experience. He recently worked as a provost and executive vice president at Taylor University. Prior to this, he had several faculty and administrative positions, both at Taylor and Southeastern University in Florida. I haven't decided yet who I really like better, whether it is Dr. Hammond or Jennifer, his wife.
I know who I like better.
Right? And you'll be glad to know that they recently celebrated 25 years of marriage together. They have 5, I see. What a gift. It is a gift. They have 5 daughters and a son, ranging from ages between 14 and 21. Our campus is enjoying getting to know the Hammonds and their children. And as a member of the faculty, I'm just delighted to be able to introduce you to him. And I have some questions, which I have promised him will not be any trick questions, but in a sense, we'll just give you an opportunity to get to know him. So Dr. Hammond?
Mm-hmm. So I'm a little nervous because my undergraduate major was the field that Sharon teaches in. And so this is flashbacks to oral exams with my professor.
It will be like that at times, but we'll see. Okay. I'm trying to go easy. He's new.
We'll see.
Right?
Yeah.
Tell us about yourself. Where did you grow up? Family, church? Just a little bit. What would you like us to know?
Sure. So I grew up in the Midwest, grew up in Indiana, and for some people in New England that they don't even know, anything past Philadelphia is still undeveloped territory. But if you're not from New England, you know that there's a center of the country. And so that's pretty much where I'm from. Indiana, and Jennifer and I both are from the same area in northern Indiana, around the city of Fort Wayne. And grew up in a church family, always kind of had those values instilled in our household, and loved being involved in church. And then Jen and I got married, mentioned 25 years ago, and we've kind of moved around. So we lived in Indiana, Illinois, Chicagoland, Fayetteville, Arkansas, Lakeland, Florida. That's part of the bio. But so New England is a new place for us to reside, but it's very familiar for our household to move to a totally new area and not know anybody. We've actually done that a few times, and then really dig into the community. So that's been part of our joy in moving here last few months.
So when you look back over your life, can you think of someone that's been influential? Who is that and why?
Yeah, there's a few people that come to mind. I think of family, my mother and father, and my mother and father-in-law. I guess I'd frame it this way. I had 3 really significant mentors, and part of the story about those 3 mentors is that they all sort of ceased to be mentors at the same time. 2 of them passed away, and one had a series of strokes that really left him incapacitated to have regular conversations. And that was just a couple years ago. One of those was my father-in-law, Jen's dad. And so, it's a different type, and we've all dealt with this. Sometimes it's the loss of a parent or it's the loss of someone significant. And those impulses of, well, this is a tough one. I'm going to send a text to Steve, or I'm going to call this person, and they're not there. And yet there's a spiritual element to that too. So these are people that have influenced me, and I'd say, without exaggerating, every day I hear their voices in my heart and in my head. They're things that they would encourage and remind me of, continue to come back. And for that, I'm really grateful.
Well, that's the sign of a true mentor, right? True person that's to influence you.
Right.
What about Christian practices or disciplines? When you look over the long haul, has there been one in particular that has sustained you, even during difficult times?
Yeah, I mean, we all, I think, work through our disciplines of scripture and journaling and prayer and that sort of thing. The habit that's probably been most helpful for me is, someone asked me, why did you start doing this? But I get up really early in the morning, and especially with college students, they can't even fathom a reason why that would be possible or important, right? And so, I mean, some of it may just be, I don't know if I'm a morning person, so to speak, if that actually is a thing. But when I was 12 years old, I started getting up early in the morning to deliver newspapers. And it was this sort of early job, and I did it for a number of years. And I never minded, I didn't always wake up immediately, but I didn't mind getting up at 5 in the morning. And there was something that I started to appreciate about being up when it's dark and seeing the sun come up and having that moment when there's really nothing happening. And still to this day, that's a big part of my routine, is to be up in the morning, usually go outside for a run or a walk, have time to reflect on scripture, have time to pray, have time to just appreciate the beauty of the morning and the beauty of nature as the morning sort of arises and wakes up. And one of the great benefits I didn't anticipate is my morning routine now is, and this is just one of the great things about this area, I go from my house, I go over to West Beach. I can go up and down West Beach and come back to my house in about a half hour, and it's just a wonderful routine. So that's not a true spiritual discipline in some sense, but it's become a great way to kind of remind me to keep those appointments and to have those times of meditative reflection and prayer.
It's solitude.
Yeah.
Right? It is, absolutely. Okay, so I haven't seen you yet teach a class. I haven't seen Professor Hammond, except there's some glimpses along the way. So I thought maybe you could take on that professorial posture and answer a few questions.
Sure.
Is that all right?
Yeah.
Students often ask us to explain the difference between evangelicalism and fundamentalism.
Oh, yeah.
All right. So, Professor Hammond, what's the difference and why does it matter?
Yeah, this is great. So trying to keep things concise, I mean, one of the pivotal persons in this story is actually a really important person in the history of Gordon College, and that's Harold John Ockengay. Ockengay was actually a Taylor graduate who went on to be trained at Princeton Seminary and Westminster Seminary, and he was a pastor for a long time. But he represented a group after World War II, along with Carl Henry and eventually Billy Graham, that were looking to sort of form a new, more interactive way to live out the Christian faith. The fundamentalist movement had really come about in the 19-teens through a series of books called The Fundamentals. And you think about the idea today of, what are the basics of Scripture? What are the basics of our Christian belief? And there was a real good movement built around that. But fundamentalism really was much more sort of inwardly focused. How do we just do the right things? And there's almost a legalism that came out of that movement. And the evangelicals, the sort of modern evangelicals after World War II, were saying, we need to take that faith and then be active in the world, be active in missions, be active in society, be active in speaking about culture and political issues. And they were really recapturing, they weren't reinventing the wheel, they were recapturing evangelicalism that we saw really at its peak in the 19th century during the Second Great Awakening, when the Benevolent Empire, as it was called, was a way for revivalism to then result in actions in society for urban renewal and revitalization of society. And so we sometimes call the new evangelical movement that started after World War II as a recapturing of that. And Today, that word gets really misconstrued and confused, and for some of you, you may yourself or even come from churches that have said we can't use that word anymore. It's too controversial. It's a lightning rod. It means political movement. It doesn't mean something that's built on our faith. So there's a lot of churning. The good news is that type of kind of reassessing and reevaluating is really a pretty strong part of the history of the Christian church and a pretty strong part of that evangelical approach to Christianity. So,
I hear you like baseball.
sure.
But more, I know you've also studied a bit of the history of baseball, right?
Yeah.
Fun fact. What's something you've learned?
Yeah, so baseball history is just kind of a hobby. And people will say, oh, so you're a professional historian. How did you get interested in studying baseball history? And the simplest explanation is I just couldn't hit the curveball. So you start to say, well, what can I do with this? Yeah, I could coach or I could just read books. So it really came about. It was one of those ideas as a historian where you think, there's kind of this short list of classes that would be your dream classes to teach. Here's what I would love to teach someday, and you kind of put that list together. And that was one of them, History of America through Baseball. And it was actually when I was living in Florida and teaching that I started teaching that course, which was great because there was spring training going on and there were games all over the place. One of the things that would be interesting that I learned through that is in the earliest days of when baseball started to get organized. This would be just after the Civil War, 1870s, 1880s. So every little town had their own team. They just kind of rounded people up and they would play this game called base. And the rules were different from town to town. And you think today even of certain card games where you go from one table to the next and people play different rules or there's different dynamics or different size of field. And that's how it was. But then what emerged quickly were two sets of rules. And this was all over. There were Boston rules and there were New York rules. And it's still true today. I mean, that rivalry between the Boston game and the New York game has its roots back in the earliest days.
And which set of rules are you going to follow? Right, there we have it.
Yeah, of course I'm Boston.
I'm not sure I believe that.
No, it's really true. So I grew up with, Cincinnati was my team growing up. And as we've moved around the country, we've sometimes lived near some other teams. We kind of follow them. But you wouldn't know this, but I have a younger brother who we don't agree on sports much, but he's a Yankees fan, and I never could understand that. And I always give him a hard time about it. And so it actually has been really easy to slip into cheering for the Red Sox because I've always hated the Yankees. I'm sorry if you're a Yankees fan. But I'm still I made a joke about it last night, but I'm still a little heartbroken about the Red Sox finishing the season. Hopefully they'll make the playoffs.
Well done. Can I ask a few questions about your family?
Yeah.
So your family was featured in People magazine. Tell us about that. How did that happen? What was that like?
That's more of a story for Jen to tell, but we were in graduate school. I was doing my doctoral work, and we had 4 kids. When we started it, some people thought, you're crazy to be a full-time student with 4 kids at home, 4 kids under the age of 5. And then we thought, it'd be kind of fun. I said to Jen one day, it'd be kind of fun as if we just had twins right now. And then we did. It didn't quite work that way, but we did have twins in the middle of doctoral work, so now we had a family of 6 kids under the age of 7. And it was a little crazy, a lot going on and trying to do graduate school. And Jen was connected with kind of a help group or a commiserating fellowship group, those mothers of multiples. It sounds so great. But it was mothers of twins and triplets and quints. Didn't they have a quad or a quint in the group, maybe? Quads. And so this is a national group, and they sent out this note saying that we're looking for a family that meets this profile. And it was really, someone came to her and said, this is your family. This is 6 kids, twins at the end, within this age range. And this reporter wanted to talk to us. So this reporter interviewed us, and what we found out was that we had the same sort of age of children and the same numbers as Brad Pitt and Angelina Jolie, which, of course, we often got confused for Brad Pitt and Angelina Jolie. So we thought, well, of course, we'll do the story. But they did this story. And the story is People magazine. It was from like 13 years ago. And there's this whole spread about the Pitt Jolie family. And, they have literally dozens of au pairs and nannies and chefs and chauffeurs and everything else. And then, at the end, there's like this, here's a pitiful family that actually has to live with this. And that was us. So there we go. That's our brush with faith. And we survived.
So give us a sketch of what life in the Hammond household is like, right?
Yeah,
what would
yeah.
a typical day be if you are all around together? What would you want to do?
Yeah, every day's a little different. Our older two are at college now. They stayed at college at Taylor in Indiana. And so, they're not part of the fun. So we have 4 girls that are in high school. I've always said that the most stressful hour of the day is, from about 6:45 to 7:45 or 6:30 to 7:30. That's when everybody's supposed to be waking up, getting ready, getting their lunches, and going off to school. So that's a little chaotic. Then it kind of calms down. But typically, school day, I'm off here at Gordon doing all kinds of great things. And then in the evenings, our girls, they all play soccer. It's kind of neat that they're all 4 on the same high school soccer team. We're 25% of the team, so the coach kind of knows they have to keep me happy or we'll walk. Right? But it's a great team, great school. They've adjusted really well to life here. Then usually in the evenings, there's any combination of homework, projects, Gordon events. As the girls are older, it's kind of like, hey, we're going to go over to a volleyball match. Who can come? Okay, you have homework. Okay, I'll take you too. Or Jen will come back. Or, we kind of team up and split up sometimes just to cover things. But I think this is true of a lot of families. But as we've moved around, and as I said earlier, we've had this idea of moving to a new area where we really didn't know others. And over time of doing that, we're just a really, really tight family. We take care of each other. We look out for each other. We share things with each other. It doesn't mean we're anything unique or abnormal, but we really do have very tight family connections, and we're really thankful for that. It means a lot with our kids.
So when you think about being a dad, and I suspect there's some parents out there that are here visiting their kids, what's something you enjoy about being a dad?
Yeah, it's actually what I kind of do for fun, which sometimes people worry. They ask that question, but I think they're almost worried. Like, what do you do to relax or step away? I mean, there's nothing more fun than seriously coming home, putting on casual clothes and a ball cap and going out to watch my girls play, or watch them do something new, or spend a day in the city, or exploring something. So that's a dad thing for sure, but I love it. And again, it's not being uber competitive. It's just being proud of them and seeing them do what they do best. So it's fun.
How do you think you're going to be able to balance the demands of this job and being a father and a husband? Yeah. How might that come together for you? Where might some of the struggles be?
Yeah, I think, even walking through that typical day,
yeah.
I mean, you can kind of imagine, well, what happens when there's Gordon events and there's kids' school events, and those are the tension points for sure. I think because, even back to that story, because we had, so many kids in such a short amount of time, and I was doing graduate school, there were some things that happened that I don't want to even take credit for. I just think they were the natural outcome of, when you have twins and a bunch of other toddlers in the house, you're not going to sleep well. So you have to kind of measure out your day and be really deliberate. When I'm doing my PhD, in the midst of that, I have to map out when I schedule time to study and when I schedule time to do family. And so for the most part, through my doctoral work, I didn't do much studying on weekends. It was just, that was time to set it aside. And that was hard. There were tension points. But even now, those have become part of our routines. And so I don't work on Saturdays. Sometimes I have to answer emails. I have to do things. But to me, it's a good habit to not, to see Saturdays as a family time. And then Sunday nights, I kind of pick the work back up. It's hard because all of us know you're never disconnected from email communication or your phone. But I think you have to really work hard to build in some of those boundaries. And by habit of years of doing it, I think it's helped us right now.
Oh, I have a colleague, one of our faculty here. Her name is Dr. Amy Hughes, and she's one of the hosts for OnScript podcast. They do something on that podcast that's very fun that I thought we could do here. It's called the Speed Round, right? So I'm going to ask a series of questions. You need to answer quickly and honestly. Are you ready? I hear you've been traveling around New England a little bit. Favorite spot so far?
Probably up at Rockport, that big rock wall. It's pretty cool. It's pretty fun to walk out there.
Yeah, good.
Yeah.
Good. If you go to an ice cream stand, what will you order?
Probably something with coffee and nuts.
Okay, got it. Favorite children's book, either one that from your childhood or one that you read to your children?
I don't know. I mean, the girls read more than I do, the children's book. They all read, the Silmarillion and Narnia books and all this stuff, and they look at me and like, Dad, you never read the Silmarillion? I'm like, no, I was a historian. It wasn't true. Don't read fantasy. Yeah. So, I read Goodnight Moon, whatever, but at some point they were in the fast lane. I'm like, fine, I'm going to go study.
All right. Well, then, for books that you would like to read, what's a book that you keep coming back to over and over again?
Well, it'll be a little nerdy, but it's The Scandal of the Evangelical Mind by Mark Knoll, which is really a pivotal book in my growth personally and spiritually, and definitely from an academic standpoint. But it's been around now for 30 years. But it's really, I just think, a really good, terrific understanding of some of these questions that we were talking about earlier, evangelicalism.
Mm-hmm. Okay, speed round over. You did well. We won't quote the Indiana question.
Yeah, I don't
well,
know what to say.
we actually might. We don't know.
Yeah. I should have said family that I have back in Indiana, of
Come
course.
on.
Yeah, I miss them a lot, but
Fair enough.
I don't know what else.
All right.
Corn. There's a
So
lot of
here
corn.
you've become the 9th president of Gordon College.
Right.
What's something that excites you about this? And maybe something that you have a hesitation about, or something that you need to learn something more about, or something like that.
Well, so on the exciting side, and this has just been validated, but coming in, I just had this sense of Gordon as a really good place with rich heritage, deep roots in the Christian faith, for all these reasons we could point to. And that's really borne out as I've talked to folks and I've heard their stories. And a common conversational question for me has been, tell me your Gordon story. And I've met with, probably hundreds of people now, on campus, off campus, alumni, parents, and others, and just said, so tell me, how did you discover Gordon? Why are you here? What called you here? Why do you serve? And those have been really rich stories, and just keep coming back to, okay, this is a place that is totally rooted and committed in a Christian approach to how we think about the world, to a rich community that helps our students grow, helps them not just grow academically, but grow spiritually, and to grow in their maturity. So those have been great things. There is this sense of, okay, how do I figure out better the context of our location and make that such a great positive thing? For our families, it's been an incredibly positive part of our experience. And so it's interesting. I just have questions. Do people who grow up in New England not realize some things and take some things for granted that I think we could do well to make a bigger part of our Gordon story to the public, to our prospective students? And so I've asked some questions. We've even done some research studies on perceptions of Gordon, and internal and external, to get after that. So we're working on that.
Does it help you think about Gordon of the future? So if you're thinking about what might we become in the years ahead, or just some basic images that come to mind for you? Yeah,
I think that's always a very wise question in higher education. No one here would say we're the same Gordon that we were in 1889, or the same Gordon we were, I was in the class in 1970. We're not the same Gordon we were in 1970. The reality is, though, that most colleges, we trade on our tradition. That's why everyone's got the year of their founding in their school seal, because it says something to you. If it said Gordon College founded 2019, you're going to go, well, we'll wait and see. So tradition matters, and yet at the same time, I think of the biblical adage of wine and wineskins. How do you keep the wine potent by making sure you don't have an old wineskin that bursts open and spills it? You bring in a new wineskin, and you make sure that's taken care of. So the reality is, and this is what I shared with that class in 1970, when I read back on the way Gordon was describing itself in 1970, I just happened upon an article recently, the same principles are there. We believe in God's sovereignty. We're built on a Christian philosophy that all of our employees and our students adhere to and agree to. That's really key, and it's really pivotal that we're going to change. The Gordon of the future, we'll be offering degrees in 10 years that we can't even imagine right now for jobs that don't exist yet. And yet, how do you keep the heart of our mission true? There's hundreds of stories of colleges that couldn't get that question right. They changed, they adapted, they have great new programs, the mission changed with it. And so for a place like Gordon, what we're trying to do is to keep our mission consistent, even though the programs, the way that we deliver those programs, there's any number of things that will look different. And I'm excited for that, and I have a lot of ideas and a good team around me and good faculty here, and so I'm really excited to think of where Gordon's going to be in 5, 10, 20 years.
So a mission doesn't sit in a void. A mission is carried out in a particular context at a particular time. So when you think about rising generations, current students at Gordon, students that'll be here in the future, what do you think is something that they're bringing to us that's an asset? And I ask that question that way on a purpose because a lot of times when we look at us people with slightly graying hair, talk about young people, we critique. But what might these rising generations be bringing to Gordon that is going to be an asset to us?
Yeah.
And will influence, our mission in a dynamic way.
And you think of the current generation of high school and college students, whether they like it or not, they're going to be more adaptive because of what they lived through the last 2 years. I mean, we've all lived through it and adapted to it, but probably complained about it a lot. And I'm thinking even in our own household of some of our kids that didn't have a high school commencement, or they couldn't go through college orientation, or their team's seasons got canceled, and yet they've bounced back. And I think there's a really important lesson there at a really formative time in their life. When you're a teenager, that all of a sudden I thought I couldn't live without having a prom, or whatever it is. And they learn that there's some ways that they can adjust and adapt. I have no doubt in my mind that type of lesson is going to be learned differently by a 19-year-old than it is by a 50-year-old. And so hopefully I've learned some things about that too. But that 19-year-old, all of a sudden, as they're looking at the rest of their future, they're thinking of alternative pathways and alternative solutions and alternative ways to deliver material and get information and communicate together. And it's not just because of the pandemic, but I think the pandemic combined with their comfort levels with technology, we'll call it, and their desire to, in a very entrepreneurial way, to see good things happen in the world, that just gives me great hope and confidence. And honestly, it's like, okay, we better be ready because these students are ready to go. They're ready to create a new world.
Yeah, as I sit in a classroom with the new class that's come in, you can feel the energy and the focus that's there. And it's evidence of exactly what you're saying.
Yeah.
We'll see how that comes about.
Yeah.
So while you're here, you will also be working with our GCSA, our student government. I hear you have a little experience with student government in your life. Mm-hmm. So tell us about that and how that might help you work with our student government.
Yeah, well, I think experience-wise was just, ages ago as an undergrad, I was really involved. And part of that was by my junior and senior year at college, I was able to sit in on meetings with the president and the president's cabinet and asked to represent the students. And it kind of left a good impression of what a good governance could look like in that way. And then later, I actually, have worked in the past with student leadership organizations. And so already this year, the president and vice president of the student body meet with me every week. We grab lunch. We talk through pretty important issues, and I've given them kind of free rein to talk about whatever they need to ask me any question, and also to what I think is really an important element to state to them, to bring me concerns anonymously. In other words, to say, we don't really want to tell you where this is coming from, but you need to know this is a concern that students have. And they've done that a couple times. It's really valuable. I'm not hearing what they hear. I'm not in all those conversations. But I think that's important. And I've told them we don't always have to agree on things, but I hope we respect each other enough to have conversations. So they've got my cell number. They can text me. I mean, students contact me by Instagram, Facebook Messenger, text. I don't do TikTok. Email, so we stay in touch.
So, Mike, I've been working in Christian higher education for 17 years. That must mean I'm a little younger than you might be, I don't know. But, one thing I've appreciated about our conversations about Christian higher ed so far is you are just aware of the real challenges that we face. Can you talk about a couple of those? And maybe, I hope, you see a horizon of hope and an opportunity as well?
Yeah. I think it's helpful sometimes to break these into quantitative and qualitative categories. So quantitative challenges, enrollment, making budget, giving percentages from alumni, those are things that we all pay attention to. And there are real challenges. There's enrollment challenges for every college right now. And colleges that are growing in their enrollment, they're probably paying more in discount than they'd like. They're giving away a lot of scholarships to get those numbers. And some of that's pandemic related. Some of it's demographic driven and that sort of thing. But that's a big challenge for sure. On the qualitative side, I think a lot of colleges, and I'm really attuned to this at Gordon, but a lot of Christian colleges, they've really struggled to find their bearings, I think, in the last few years. And some of it is around this confusion over the term evangelical, and some of it is around kind of a confusion over what it means to innovate but not lose your mission. I mean, those to me are principles that I've drawn out of some of these questions of what it means to be a Christian college today. What's our mission and what are we doing that's unique or different? So as I talk to college presidents from both Christian and non-Christian colleges, they're similar. Non-Christian colleges wouldn't have those identity issues, but they have different identity issues that they're struggling with right now.
So do you see a path forward through that?
Yeah.
What would be an opportunity that we can take hold of?
Yeah, well, again, I think, so if I was here trying to articulate a vision for Gordon that wasn't rooted in this 132-year history, we'd just be reinventing it. We're not reinventing it. One of the great things about this place is that the people who serve here care deeply about Gordon's direction and the pathway that we're on. I'll take that over apathy. Sometimes apathy is easier. You think, well, no one cares, so I'm just going to do what I want. But even though it's probably harder to kind of wrestle through different opinions and different ideas, it's really worth it. So that's, for me, from an identity standpoint, that's the path forward. And I actually firmly believe that if you don't get the qualitative issues right, you're not going to get the quantitative issues. You can't just come up with a scheme or a marketing strategy and fix it. People are going to figure out you're not who you say you are. And so we've got to figure out the qualitative issues, and I think that'll drive us towards success on the quantitative side.
Well said. So if there were some parents here that have students at Gordon, or maybe they might in the future have a student at Gordon, what advice would you give them? What advice would you have for parents?
Yeah. Well, obviously, when your college students leave the house and they're away, you start praying differently. You pray in a different way. And, one thing I keep mentioning, it's my prayer, it's an aspirational prayer, but it's my prayer here that every student that comes to Gordon will leave here with a deeper relationship with Jesus than when they started. And that's just what I think we need to be always thinking about and praying about and having our hearts tuned to that. You might say, well, that's crazy, Mike. You're never going to achieve that goal. Well, it's not up to me. It's up to me to pray for that and to think about how we do that in a way that points toward a deeper relationship with Christ through that Gordon experience. And for some, it may not happen until years later, but we hope that this is the place that tunes people that way. So I would ask you as parents to join in that prayer, not just for health and success and good grades and safety from COVID. Those are good things too. And we're committed to all those. But understand that while your students are here, it's such a formative time in their lives. Frankly, it's why I love working with college students and working in higher ed, because there's no other time for most of us that we really kind of come to understanding in so many ways and so many different issues. And it sets the course for the rest of our lives. So that's a lot to pray about. But I'd ask you to join me in praying that way. And just, I talk about how close our family is, but it's no different. When I ask the kids, how's your day? They're like, fine. There's not always a whole long report. But I think be aware and attuned to what it is that your son or daughter might be wanting to tell you, might need to tell you. There have been times when they are sort of gushing about something, and you just say, okay, something's going on here. I need to listen. And we all have had those experiences. So.
I appreciate in that question, in your answer, how you responded to the idea of what your greatest hope is for Gordon students, that they would come to know Jesus Christ as their Savior in deeper ways that informs their lives. So can you connect that for us to when you talk about being part of a learning community? So how does that take form here at Gordon College?
Yeah, and I think that's where one of the great things I've discovered just talking to folks here at Gordon, we're not the true model of how you live that out is not just to say, well, we have this sort of dissected campus where over here you're going to learn, and over here you're going to do spiritual work, and over here you're going to live, and over here you're going to eat. We do lay out the campus that way, but really what we believe is that every aspect of this learning community is a place where we're committed to deeper faith and deeper spiritual formation. And so it happens as much in conversations in Tupper Hall over dinner as it does in the library studying to write a paper as it does in our chapel services. And we need to be thinking critically and asking the Lord to guide our thinking as much in chapel as we do in the classroom. When we say all truth is God's truth, and we believe that, that means we really do believe that God can also speak to us and pull us closer to Him through any number of ways, any number of means. And so I can articulate what that should look like in student life, in the residence halls, what that should look like in our chapel programs and in classes in training for ministry, but also classes in the natural sciences. I mean, we really do try to draw all those things under that mission.
Well, President Hammond, we're glad you're here. Thank you for uprooting your family and Jennifer and bringing them to be part of our community. And we look forward to what you're going to do here and how God is going to move Gordon College into a new phase of our history. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
And thank you all for being here.
Yeah.